Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Balázs Szepesi. I will moderate this panel, and let me to introduce our panelists. Sean Riordan, he's an old passionate diplomat. Emin Emrah Danis, he will be the energy economist of the panel. Petr Drulak, he comes partly from diplomacy, partly for political thinking, better to say. And György Bacsa, he is the business tycoon of our panel, now representing the MOL Hungarian company. And now our task is to look at the landscape of energy, what the war makes about it, and we will focus on three big questions: what changed, what does it mean, and what to do. Put it very simply. And we had a small correspondence before the panel, so I think that to warm up and to make the topic standing on the ground, my first question would be about James Bond. What do you think James Bond scriptwriter would get some ideas about the post-war energy world? What would be on the screen of the next James Bond film or the next after? So I would like ask all of you to give some initial ideas, then to speak about James Bond. Maybe the best expert comes from Britain.
I'm not sure I'm a great expert on James Bond, but I think we'll find James Bond is in the Gulf states fighting against his French enemies to ensure that the LNG goes to Britain and not to Europe. I think meanwhile we'll find Felix Leiter, his CIA opposite number, trying to prevent the succession of Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia to ensure that Saudi Arabia still trades oil in dollars. Spectre will be doing dirty deals in Australia to corner the market in uranium while using the outback for the environmentally damaging lithium processing and processing of other rare earth metals. I think Q will have been moved into trying to create algorithms so that we can manage diverse energy sources in efficient ways. I think the Wagner Group will be fighting to control the cobalt mines in Democratic Republic of Congo, and I think Miss Moneypenny will just have lost her life savings speculating on Bitcoin.
Thank you.
And I'm available to write the script up if any producers are listening.
Thank you, Balázs. First of all, it's great to be on Budapest with these distinguished participants, and I want to thank you for organizing of this great event. Balázs, when I started to work in energy industry, I was 24 years old. And we were talking about supply security, we were talking about dependence to Russian gas and creating alternatives. I'm 39 years old, and we are still talking about the same issues. And that shows two facts to us. The first, I'm getting older, and the second is we are still on the 0 point. Unfortunately, after the Ukraine war, we face this reality again. But this energy crisis is a very complex crisis, and Ukraine war is only one part of this crisis. There are other main reasons for this crisis. The first, the imbalances of the global global energy markets, the supply and demand imbalances, the COVID-19 pandemic, also global economic instability. Sorry. These problems, unfortunately, creates unpredictability and instability in the energy markets. But with the Ukraine crisis, we entered the new stage. The geopolitical risks and the geopolitical crisis raised the supply security issues. Also, it created the new additional problems for in our energy markets. But with the normalization period after the COVID pandemic in 2021, We were already started to enter the crisis on energy markets due to imbalancing of supply and demand, also the supply chain problems, and the sharply decreasing investments, especially in oil and gas markets. And with the normalization period, we face these problems. And as I mentioned before, Ukraine crisis. With the Ukraine crisis, we totally lost our predictability and stability on the energy markets. And now we are still talking about, as I mentioned in my words previously, still talking about the supply security. Yes, European countries were very lucky in this winter because the weather temperatures was not so cold. It wasn't under the normal temperatures, but next year will be a problem again because the demand pushed last year, especially in natural gas, but with the normalization and the increasing economic activities, also European gas demand can be increased. And yes, European countries still filling the gas storage facilities for next winter, but Europe still very heavily dependent to Russia and natural gas and LNG entrance points, especially in Western Europe, still not enough, and also limitations on the infrastructure of the natural gas and transmission systems will be increased risks again. And that's why I am defining this is the failure of the EU with one word.
Okay, so no idea for James Bond.
Yeah.
Okay. Petr?
Well, it's great to be here, thank you, and thank you for these great questions. I was thinking about James Bond, and I found out that I don't have to be that inventive, because there is actually a movie plot on which we can work. There is a movie from the late 1960s, which is called, I think, In Her Majesty's Secret Service. And that's quite interesting, because there is a bad character called Blofeld, you may know him. And Blofeld actually has a special resort in Swiss Alps. It's like a sanatorium or medical institute. And there he collects actually women from all around Europe, or the world actually, from all around the world. And he hypnotizes these women to turn them actually into, he calls them killing angels. So he gives them biological weapons, and with these biological weapons they are supposed to destroy the world's global agriculture. And of course they will die. So he trains them for suicidal missions by hypnosis. Well, how is it linked with today? You know, when you look how European leaders think about energy, it seems to me that this is a group of people who must be hypnotized by someone, and they are on suicidal mission. First, it was the green transition. The green transition, which actually, from scientific and technical point of view, cannot work. I mean, there are many people, many experts who point out that the numbers of the green transition do not add up. So that was the first thing. And the second thing was actually starting energy war with Russia. I mean, let's not be mistaken. Russia started war on Ukraine, no doubts about that. But it's Europe which started energy war on Russia by imposing sanctions. And again, it's to the detriment of Europe. So it seems to me that these European leaders are hypnotized by someone whenever they meet in Brussels and the password energy is pronounced, they start to act as a sort of a zombies, which are directed by some sort of a Blofeld. So I would appreciate if James could find out who the Blofeld is and destroy him. And that would be actually a liberation for all of us.
Thank you. I think it was a good example. I'm not so, I'm not so familiar with all the James Bond movies. So first of all, I think the situation is closer to a First World War movie than to a James Bond movie, because what we are seeing now on the front lines is unfortunately as tragical and as mass killing as it was in the First World War. And another analogy, that after the First World War, even the the winning countries went bankrupt and everyone was poorer than before, so everything was destroyed. Europe lost its leading position, so all the European empires started dying, so the British, the French, it was just a matter of time, and of course the Second World War gave the final end on it, so then in the 50s and 60s all the big empires collapsed, so there was no winner of those wars and there were a lot of sufferings, and I think in this war the same, Europe will not win. Whatever and whenever it ends, and we really hope that it will end sooner than it turns into a Mad Max movie. So definitely I think the problem is that there is no scenario in which Europe as a society, economy, cultural community will come out as a stronger one, as a healthier one. So that's the biggest problem around. So, but by the way, we already gave a set for a James Bond movie as Mole Group. The word is not enough for shot in our refinery or certain scenes of it. The shot in our refinery. I mean, for this movie, I would not give any scene from our company.
Thank you. So let's go into the boring part. We don't know how and when will the war end. We don't know exactly how that world will look like. But I think that all of us has guesses about it. And we speak a lot about the basic books of energy business and energy economy and energy diplomacy must be somehow revised. It's important both for companies and nations how to work on this revision. What do you think, which chapters and how must be revised in the basic books of energy business, energy economy, and energy diplomacy? Let's start from the economics point of view.
I want to give some numbers for understanding for this crisis. In 2021, the European Union imported 155 billion cubic meters of Russian gas. And in other words, EU imported 45% of its total imports and 40% of total gas consumption from Russia. But European Union not only depended Russia on the natural gas, also in oil. The EU imported 27% of its total oil from Russia and 46% of its total coal import made by Russia in 2021. And also, European Union in the same year paid 99 billion euro to Russia only for energy imports. In 2011, this number was 148 euro. But in last 10 years, European gas consumption decreased, but also the gas production of European Union decreased because of the phase out of the Groningen gas fields, especially in Netherlands. That's why European Union failed to decrease its dependence on Russia on energy markets. But this dependency didn't occur in one night in Europe. The first gas disputes between Ukraine and Russia started on the mid-90s after the collapse of Soviets, but European Union didn't feel itself as in the threat. They didn't give high attention. But 2005, 2007, 2008, 2009, 2013, the real gas disputes started between these two countries. And after the occupation of Crimea, European Union understand that there is a big risk for supply security. And they designed and they developed strategies for diversification, for decrease the dependence on Russian gas, and create an alternatives for Russian gas. But as I mentioned in my previous words, after the 15 years, unfortunately, European Union couldn't success for decrease the gas dependence on Russia. Of course, there are some political reasons behind this failure. The first, the German and Russian relations are very important. And Germany doesn't want to participate in these policies against Russia. And finally, we faced with this unsuccessful results. Also, the European Union's renewable energy-centered policies wasn't designed with the realities of the market participants and energy markets. They were designed very aggressive green energy policies, but market realities was different. Also, the phase out of the nuclear power plants and the coal power plants raised the dependence to Russia because they replaced nuclear and coal power plants with the natural gas. In 2021, the natural gas fired plants generated 20% of EU's total power production. Also 20% power generated from the coal. And as I mentioned, in these two sources, European Union heavily dependent on Russia. And that's why the new politics, the new strategies should be designed with the cooperation with the private markets and the energy markets. Unfortunately, this crisis is the policy failure of the EU and regulatory failure of the EU. This is not market failure. This is policy failure and regulatory failure.
Thank you. So don't trust Russia. That's the revision of the book. And how it looks like from business perspective.
I think if you talk about energy policy chapters, a couple of years ago, and especially after the Paris Agreement, it was always about that what we can do for sustainability and green transition, and how we can accelerate these programs, and how we can channel more and more percentage of our GDP and investments into green investments. Last year, everything was about security and affordability, and I think this is very important that now in the whole energy policy, the price of the energy supply and the security of the energy and feedstock supply of Europe is in danger. Just some figures also that previously the EU average was that the countries are spending roughly 4% on the fossil gas, coal, oil, and other imports, because most of the European countries are net importer. Less than 10% domestic oil and less than 20% domestic gas. That's the usual average what a European country can produce, and the other they need to import. So they spent roughly 4% of their GDP. Now it went up to 10%. We calculated that until 2050, to make a net zero transition, which of course technologically is very uncertain how it will happen, but financially the prediction was that annually roughly 3% of the GDP should have invested into green technologies. Now we spend 6% only on fossil, additional 6 percentage point more than before. So there's not enough. It's not affordable. And if something is not affordable, but you still keep pushing and pushing with norms, with statutory rules, with regulation, then it will crack down. And that's the problem in the energy policy, that affordability, security overrides practically the mathematically or theoretically established, very nicely calculated transition program. And the reality should be, how to say now, incorporated in our energy policy as well. The reality is that European production, European living became more expensive, more unsecure. We have to spend more on our security. We have to spend more on our basic feedstock, basic needs. And of course, we have to work on the climate policies and the transitions, but we cannot turn the world upside down from Europe, especially if we are not strong enough.
So, as you say, more meddling through and less visionary approach. Yeah. Okay, and from your perspective?
Well, I would argue that the basic rule should be less dogmatic in energy policy. It should be non-dogmatic. It should be more pragmatic. And there are several areas. Well, first, take renewables. I mean, it's a great idea to have renewables, but you cannot make a dogma out of them. I mean, for the countries like Czechia, it's really a non-starter. We don't have sun, we don't have wind to sustain the energy needs of the country. That's obvious. It may work in Portugal. It will not work in Central Europe. So renewables should be part of it, but should not be imposed as dogma. Another dogma is about the coal. I mean, you can have technologies which will make coal burning much cleaner than we used to have. That's the way. So, of course, it's fine to diminish the coal, but not to leave it out completely. The same about nuclear energy. It's relatively, it's quite clean, it's safe. We should not give up on it. And speaking actually about the suppliers, I think it's a good idea to diminish our dependence on Russia. Why not? But it's not a good idea to really abandon our trade with Russia. Because, you know, it's in terms of geopolitical. First of all, I mean, Russia was a reliable supplier which was quite reliable and was cheap. Of course, there is a geopolitical risk. That's no one can doubt about it. But when we talk now about alternatives, what are the alternatives for Russia? It's Africa, it's Middle East. These are the main alternatives. Does someone really believe that the geopolitical risks there are lower than with Russia? I don't believe so. So it's fine not to be too dependent on Russia, but it's important to have it as a part of the game. So no dogmas about which source to take and about which supplier to take.
So I think from your diplomatic perspective, to be pragmatic is not a new line in the basic book. What will change in your perspective?
Well, I think being pragmatic is what we used to do as diplomats. Unfortunately, European diplomats have been infected by American diplomats and have now got into ideology. So I think some strong medicine for anti-ideology medicine is needed. But I'd like to go back to my film script. I really like my film script. And the reason that we've got James Bond fighting the French in the Gulf is that we're going to be competing for LNG. We're going to need LNG. We're not going to get gas flowing through the pipelines from Russia anytime soon. But it's not only us who wants LNG. Asia needs LNG. Other countries are going to be trying to import LNG. So there's going to be a competition for limited supplies. The reason that Felix Leiter is off in Saudi Arabia is that if Saudi Arabia starts selling oil for yuan or for other currencies, that's going to mean a radical rethink of global energy markets. We keep talking about renewables going to the green transition. That just makes us ever more reliant on rare earth metals. And we're not going to process them in Europe because of environmental damage. We are, in many environmental issues, utter hypocrites. We don't reduce our carbon emissions, we transfer them to other countries. We don't reduce the level of environmental degradation, we transfer it to other countries. The reason that China produces 70% of the world's lithium, which we need for our green transition, is they're willing to take the environmental hit that processing involves. So, you know, Spectre is sticking in the middle of the Australian outback where nobody's going to notice environmental damage. Even coming to the idea that Q is going to be doing artificial intelligence to try and balance the diverse use of energy sources, this does become very diverse. It is much more complicated balancing a range of different energy sources which you can use under different meteorological conditions, but then suddenly you can't. I mean, we've seen these problems where the wind stops blowing in Britain, and suddenly you can't rely on wind power. So you have to have highly complex systems that are going to balance these, and these are going to need even more rare earth metals to operate them, with more dependency on limited supplies. And also, artificial intelligence is demanding ever more energy. So the reason I mentioned poor Miss Moneypenny losing a life investment in Bitcoin is that Bitcoin mining at the moment is consuming more energy than gold mining in the world. So our moves into artificial intelligence, our moves into new digital technology, dear God, our move towards the metaverse, should it ever happen, is only going to increase the demands we're making for energy in our countries, so that energy security becomes a major foreign policy issue. So perhaps the final point is to make, get it out of the economics ministry, get it out of the energy ministry, and stick it in your foreign ministry, because that's where it's going to be, we're going to be dealing with it.
Thank you. The audience has also the opportunity to ask questions. You can use the system like yesterday. You have on your badge this code or the number, and you can send questions to the tablet with me, and in the last 10 minutes we will discuss about them. But before that, I have the privilege to ask. If we can see that it will be a more pragmatic, more sophisticated and more uncertain world, but be a little bit more concrete what will happen. Everyone asks two things about ups and downs. What will happen with the Russian supply after the war? And what will be the role of the renewables in a post-war era? We touched both of these issues, but I think that it's important to elaborate more on them. Maybe now it's best to start it from business perspective.
Just somehow connecting the previous topic with this one, I think my feeling or my experience that policymakers make two big mistakes. One is that they really love to have top-down stretches in the target, so which then turns the targets irrealistic. Secondly, they really believe that they can stop the clock, and then practically the today status will be valid in 10 years. What I'm meaning that there's no standstill in energy consumption. Energy demand is constantly growing. Even in Europe, if you say that the energy efficiency will lower the demand growth, globally, it represents, for example, in carbon emission, Europe represents 10%. 90% of the world needs and cannot care that much about energy efficiency and carbon emission reduction. So the global energy demand is constantly growing and growing. So any kind of idea which says that one of the energy sources you would eliminate, traditional ones, which never happened in the history before. We still have wood, we still have coal in an energy mix, and not in an insignificant manner. The issue is that the energy demand compared to 100 years ago is a couple of times higher, and it will grow still continuously. So the add-on, the additional energy demand, how we will serve. And of course, renewables shall keep up with the pace of the demand growth and should have an increasing stake within the energy mix. But you cannot say that this renewable will eliminate and replace fossil, nuclear, biomass, and even coal. Globally, it will be there. So if you ask me whether the crude will be produced, yes, it will be produced. Globally, it will be placed. How much Europe will reduce the crude consumption, I don't know, because the demand grows. For me, would rather say that it will stagnate for a while, and the additional demand will be served from renewable and nuclear. That's the main direction. Natural gas will increase, a little bit higher expense, because natural gas is needed for the flexibility, for the balancing, because the grids are not designed for a renewable power grid. So gas will increase. LNG intake, pipelines, networks, a lot of money will be spent on that, so it will stay with us, and globally it's also increasing. So I think the saying that the world will be decarbonized and fossil will disappear and renewable, this is a bullshit. I mean, the world will have a diverse portfolio, bigger renewable stake, bigger and bigger renewable portfolios, and gradual shifting, but fossil will stay with us. I mean, why would you, the most developed technology is now based on gas in terms of generation and based on combustion engine, if you talk about transportation. Saying that, okay, one day for the other, it's obsolete. I mean, you can do it in a micro city or a micro community, but as a global trend, it's nonsense.
And about Russia energy supply for Europe in the post-war world, what do you think about it?
I think the two things. The Russia supply to Europe was designed like 40, 50 years ago. After the oil crisis, Europe invented that they should loosen the Cold War, and the Russia feedstock, natural feedstock, and energy and gas will substitute the more and more expensive Middle East crude, and of course the missing and depleting mining from the Europe and the colonies, because the European empire lost their colonies. So Russia was a perfect substitute for the missing cheap oil and the missing minerals from the colonies. This relationship was very natural, close to each other. Moscow is like 2,000-3,000 kilometers from here. I mean, China from Moscow is like 5,000, 6,000 kilometers, so, and no infrastructure. So here is pipeline, everything, rails, everything. In the eastern part of Russia, it's not existing. And so maybe they will develop it, and if Russia is obliged to go for the Asian markets, then I would say that Russia will find its place, Asia will finance it, because currently, for example, Asia pays the most, the highest premium for LNG, for all the resources what they don't have. So for them, in certain cases, it makes sense to divert the Russian exports to Asia, like crude to India, gas to China, and of course, it's not in the interest of Russia, because the logistic costs they will have to deduct from their income, so their net revenue will shrink, but they will have a market. Certain profit, definitely, and Europe will have a significantly more expensive and also quite risky alternative sourcing areas.
So both Europe and Russia will diversify?
Yes, and both of them will lose on it.
I see. And what is the green and the green color and the Russian accent in your script?
Look, it's difficult to say what's going to happen with Russia because we don't know how the war's going to end. And depending on how the war ends, the Russians will or will not have an interest in selling gas to Europe. And it's not just economic interest here. Here we're talking about geopolitical interests. So if we end the war in such a way that Russia is still in confrontation with Europe, and where sanctions are still being maintained on Russia by the European Union, why on earth would the Russians simply renew gas supplies to Europe? Something they see as a geopolitical weapon more than as an economic activity. So I think we will see the Russian gas going far more to Asia, that the infrastructure will be built, the Chinese will be willing to finance that infrastructure. It becomes part of Russia being ever more tied into China as its junior partner. And Europe will find itself struggling to find energy supplies and energy sources. In terms of the green transition, the problem with the green transition is it makes us dependent on other materials that we need. So it doesn't end dependency on foreign supplies. It makes us dependent on rare earth metals, the other materials we need. It makes us dependent on various components, on microchips and the like, none of which we're very good at producing in Europe. And we're never going to mine lithium or other rare earth metals in Europe because of the environmental damage. We're never going to process them here. So I find our much heralded green transition is going to find itself equally geopolitically dependent as our other energy supplies. And at the same time, for me, the green transition doesn't make sense unless everybody's doing it at the same time. There's absolutely no point in reducing our carbon emissions if they're going up in China, they're going up in India. All we're doing is damaging our economy without making any difference in climate change. So again, it's not what we do with green transition here. It becomes a foreign policy issue of persuading other countries that they're going to reduce their carbon emissions.
Thank you. You wrote an article that Turkey will be the key.
Yes, Turkey will be key, but in the short term, I don't believe that it will be a big problem for Russia. But in the long run, it will be a problem for Russia. But when we look at the markets, the Greek oil tankers carrying 90% of Russian oil, and European countries still importing refined oil products, which produce from Russian oil, but in the third country, because if it's refining in third country, it won't be Russian oil. But still, European countries still importing Russian oil products. And also, Russia is very important, still important economic partner for Europe, for European export. For example, they are exporting many things through Turkey. Also, Russia still trying to develop the new strategies. For example, being an energy hub in Turkey. Also, Russia making new negotiations and new projects with Hungary, especially in nuclear power plants. Also, many countries still import Russian gas because Russian gas is cheaper than the LNG. In the last 2 years, we experienced the historically expensive LNG prices. That's why European countries will be still dependent on Russia in short term, maybe in the midterm, but in the long run, yes, the scan is bright for Europe, but also in renewable energy, there are problems. But I can certainly I can say that in the long term, the Ukraine crisis will be catalyzer for renewable energy sources, for green hydrogen, for power storage, for electric vehicles. But in the short term, the picture is not very clear for Europe.
So, and Czech Republic is very similar to Hungary, landlocked Middle European country. What will happen with us in Russian and green terms?
I'm not sure what will happen with us. I still hope that there will be some, return to reality. But speaking about Russia, it seems to me, well, it's a fact that that energy exports are vital for Russia. A significant part of its budget depends on the revenues from energy exports. That's for sure. And that makes Russia actually quite rational when dealing with energy exports. If you look at its past behavior, they did not use actually energy exports as a geopolitical weapons against serious customers. They did use energy exports as a weapon against Ukraine, against Belarus. That was the case. But they never did it against Western Europe, and they are unlikely to do it against China and the others. Even during the ongoing war, they were actually ready to supply their enemies. It was us actually who started the energy war on them. So my point is that Russia behaves quite rationally as a market agent, market actor with respect to its energy resources. So in this respect, it's a question of supply and demand. They will do their best to maximize their risks, to maximize their profits and minimize their risks, meaning that they will, of course, increase, and they have started increasing their supply to Asia, China, India, and others. But it's also in their interest to keep Europe as a possibility, as to diversify geopolitical risks. So that's the Russian perspective. Now, the European perspective, it's more complicated because, as we actually all agree, most of the European energy policy is quite ideological, and it may be the obstacle for the future cooperation with Russia. But again, in long term, the reality imposes itself. So whatever your ideology, if the ideology diverts from reality significantly, then the reality comes back in with revenge. That's actually the experience of communist regimes. Because, their economic systems were against basic economic rationality. So they needed actually to fall down. And unfortunately, that's something which looms large for the European Union, for the European energy policy. If you sort of deny reality, you can do it perhaps for a decade, maybe for 2 decades, but you cannot do it forever. Then the reality comes back in. And that makes actually for me the resources partnership between Europe and Russia inevitable in long run. Of course, the question is how long the long run will be. And the same actually applies to renewables. Again, as I said, and as others agree, actually, it's a great idea, but it makes us again dependent on others in many respects. So hopefully, we will have this reflection saying, well, let's have some part of green, let's have renewable in our energy mix, but we should not exaggerate. Let's keep them on the level which makes sense from the energy and economic needs of all other countries.
And the other big question in this topic is who will be the winner and the loser. Let me put this question in the following way. If I had $10 million and I would invest it in a 10 or 15-year-long perspective, in energy, what do you propose? What should I buy and why?
I don't know, as a diplomat, I never earned that much, so I never thought about it.
You know, it's like the James Bond film question. It's dreaming. So if you had this money, I had this money, maybe Mol has this money, but...
I was getting worried. I was beginning to think that MCC paid too much to its academics.
So idea about where to invest,
I mean,
looking...
I think there are two big winners out of this energy crisis, and it's the US and it's China. And third, I'd say India, in that China and India are able to carry out this a kind of trade where they buy Russian energy cheap and sell it expensive to the West, and that's our problem. And the Americans don't care because they went for fracking, and they've made themselves energy independent. So I would say they're the winners. Europe is definitely the loser. So I won't tell you where to put your money, but just don't put it in Europe.
If I add, because I would like to, if I make a ranking, I think if this resetting the Russian-European relationship will end, that Russia and Europe will go apart for long term, and Russia will go with Asia, then I think undoubtedly the biggest winner will be Far Asia, not only China, but entire Far Asia, because they get an affordable, reliable sourcing partner, significantly cheaper than before. Plus, they have a big market, because then the separation between EU and Russia will not stop at the energy level. Then it will be an economic separation, trade separation, and so on and so on. And I think at the US level, if I'm not taking into account how much the defense industry will win on selling all these things, the energy industry will be roughly a zero-sum game, because they have to reset their export position from Far Asia, which is much better in terms of premium, to Europe, which is paying less and willing to pay less because cannot afford that much premium, because Europe economic growth is not comparable to Asian one. So I think US will not win as much as certain people think in the energy sector, in the gas trading or energy. So in the defense sector is different. I don't want to guess how much they will win on this one, but definitely Europe will be the loser. So in terms of non-affordable or higher checks for energy bills.
And in technology?
Technology, I think it's always a question. Okay, then replace energy-intensive industry to technology-intensive. Okay, what does it mean? So I mean, okay, and if the end you are poorer than before, then you don't have money to invest. I mean, invest into new technologies, into research and development. The research and development goes where the money is. Goes to US, goes to China. So we will lose the big brains as well, the big centers and so on and so on. Because I mean, these are magnets. The big powers, the big economic powers, business powers, they are like magnets. They will have big hubs, and all the technology development will take place over there. We will be a follower, and as a follower, we are consumer. We are going to a setup where we are a consuming market, big consuming market, very nice market for all global exporters. And of course, we have some ancillary services, tourism, whatever. But I mean, we said that it's getting closer and closer to a kind of exhibition center. So look, Europe is a very nice, traditional, old buildings, good food, good wine, go by. And that's it.
So tourism, I understand.
Well, going back to your question about where to place the investment, you know, 10 years ago, a Czech tycoon was facing this question. He had several, well, tens or maybe hundreds of millions of euro. He was interested in energy, and he was thinking what to buy. And guess what he did, actually? He went to France, he went to Germany, and he bought a number of coal power centrals, which were in the process of being shut. So it was like a crazy idea, but he made his counts, and he actually came to the conclusion that they cannot be shut. So he bought them very cheap, he got subsidies, and he made enormous money out of that. So I mean, the right answer to your question is, do what many people would believe is totally crazy, but you have good counts, so you know that it will bring money. So definitely the guy is a winner. He bet on coal, and he won. Now, speaking about the losers, I mean, yes, obviously Europe seems to be a big loser of this whole game, but let's be more specific, because not everyone in Europe, I mean, these people who will take care of tourism, as you suggested, why? They will earn nice money. Maybe some bankers will earn nice money, but who will lose is European industry, and that's very important. And that's very important for Central Europe, because our economies are industrial economies. We are more industrial than anyone else in the European Union. So Central Europeans will lose more than anyone else. So European industry, Central Europe. And then if you look into European societies, again, you know, inside European societies, you will have people who will, again, earn a lot of money, and you will have people who will lose a lot. Who will lose a lot? That's the European middle class. Because speaking about energy prices, middle class is very sensitive to it. Speaking about high-quality industrial jobs, it's again something which is linked with the middle class. So not the upper class, not really the lower classes, but the middle class will suffer because of that.
Thank you. I want to separate winners and losers for short term and for long term. In short term, the losers are European countries, European consumers, and European taxpayers. But the winners are America, because America exports US LNG, and in this winter, the average profits in one LNG tanker was around $90 million. Can you imagine? They write profit $90 million, $100 million in a one tanker of LNG. That's why America is winner of this crisis. Also, China and Asian countries such as India are the winners because they are importing Russian oil and gas, LNG, with the cheaper prices. In the long term, Russia will be the loser, but European countries and also China and America will be the winners. Because in the long run, the green hydrogen, the power storage, electric vehicles will be the game changers. But in short term, it's difficult to replace Russian gas with these sources. Especially in hydrogen, we still need 10 years for create a scale for higher efficiency rates and for lower investment costs and production green hydrogen for enough green hydrogen for replace the Russian gas. And that's why in short term, European countries affected very dramatically, but European politicians still designed new strategies with renewable energy-centered policies. Still, they are doing the same mistakes. They are not designed with the market realities. I want to give some examples because I have two hats. One is energy expert and is the second renewable energy investor. In Europe, they announced in the last months, 300 gigawatts of wind energy investments for next decades. But it's very difficult. Why it's difficult? Until at the end of last year, there was a shortage for solar panels. Also, in wind turbine supply chain, we still have problems. Not only the supply chain. For example, in France, if you want to make wind energy investment, you need approximately 5 to 7 years. In Turkey, 4 years. In many European countries, approximately 5 years because due to the permissions and for the environmental concerns. So, also, one of the lessons that the European countries take, they want to replace China with another countries, not only for energy industry, also for many industrial sectors. For example, Turkey is Europe's the biggest solar panel producer, manufacturer, number one. And we are fourth biggest turbine and equipment manufacturer. But still, European Union doesn't define Turkey as an EU. They accept us as a non-EU, and this creates difficulties, especially for reach to finance. Why I'm saying this? if the European Union realize their targets for renewable energy sources, they need to create reliable industrial partners such as Turkey. And also they need to make a new investment for industry. For example, Italian energy company Enel, maybe you know, they are making solar panel investment in United States. Why United States? Because Inflation Reduction Act. There are advantages. That's why if the European Union still making these mistakes, unfortunately in the long run, they won't reach their targets on renewable energy, green hydrogen. But China and Asia and United States will be the absolute winners of this energy war in short, mid, and long term.
Thank you. All of you mentioned that Europe should start to think about how to revise its energy policy, either in principles or in practices. What would be your, at most, C proposals for this revision of European energy policy?
If I could pick up a point that Peter made, comparing European energy policy with kind of communism, I think actually that the European Commission reminds me of the Soviet bureaucracy in the 1980s, where they're ideologically driven, they're centralizers, they're harmonizers, and if you don't agree with them as a country or an individual, they don't send you to a psychiatric hospital as they did in the Soviet Union in the 1980s, but they cancel you. And we're seeing this with Hungary, and we're seeing with individuals. So we need to break that mentality. But I think even more important, we've got to learn that crises are not things that happen and then we get to the other side of it and we go back to normal. Right? We very much have that mentality. We had it over COVID, we'll get through COVID, then we can go back to normal. And it means we can do what we like during the crisis. The same with the war in Ukraine. It's okay because the war in Ukraine will end and then we can go back to normal. What we need to understand is that permanent crises are the new normal. That we have COVID, we have a war in Ukraine, there'll be a financial crisis or a banking crisis, or there'll be China will invade Taiwan, or there'll be some other crisis. And they're going to be continued. I think this is the kind of perma-crisis, is what your policymakers have got to get used to. And that means you need to change the way you think. Because you can't think, oh, it's okay, we can take emergency measures and then get back to normal. Because there is no normal. So you've got to be thinking in a crisis, how do we do long-term policy? How do we stick to our long-term policy objectives? And how do we meet the short-term requirements of the crisis? In the 19th century, policymakers used to be quite good at this because they assumed that the world of the 19th century was a world of continuous crises and repeated crises. We've forgotten how to do that. We think that, so for example, during the war in Ukraine, we've gone back to coal, using coal to produce energy, ignoring, apparently, our green transition objectives. So I think that's part of the change. And then I think the final part of the recommendation I make is you've got to start thinking about energy supply as critical geopolitical policy making. And if you don't get the geopolitics of it, Europe very quickly is going to run out of energy. And this is not about, I'm afraid, supply and demand. It's not about economics, not just because I don't understand economics as a diplomat, but it's about the reality of the world. We're talking about power conflicts in the world, and that's going to shape who gets the energy.
If I say that we need more than energy policies because we have a lot of versions of energy policies, I think in the EU we need very pragmatic and very competitive industry policy. I think it's fully right that what is now at stake is European heavy industry, whatever remained of it. So we lost a lot of light industry. We lost it in the last century, all the textile and others. Now the European heavy industry, manufacturing is at risk, and chemical industry. If I add it up, it's more than half of the GDP. And we can lose it. We can lose it because of the energy problems. We can lose it because of the global competition. And the IRA is another aspect that there is a very big temptation from the US as well to relocate production facilities, to relocate to the US. Tax incentives direct subsidies in the car industry, in the chemical industry, in the energy. So if we lose these sectors, not only against China, where at least there is a cultural, logistic, whatever distance that stop many of the countries that why not to move to China, but to the US, it's just the Atlantic. And I think this is a problem. So if we don't realize that in our well-being or the policymakers' well-being, make them not to realize that it's not ideology, it's not dogma. So everything was right. It's not a theory. It's not who is right, who is wrong, what is the idealistic word, but it's about you are getting robbed tomorrow. Your industry will be robbed, and then you are just a follower. You can follow because you don't have anything.
Well, I don't have too much to add to it. I would make a specific proposal actually about nuclear industry. Because, you know, nuclear industry obviously is indispensable for our energy future. If you look at the European nuclear industry, it's a very sorry story because we have only one country, one company today which is able to build nuclear power stations, and that's EDF in France. And, well, they are doing what they can. Their record is not really convincing. But we have a clear case, what you just said, for an industrial policy. Let's help, actually, to create another nuclear company which is able to build nuclear power stations in Europe and elsewhere. I mean, and again, we in Central Europe, we still have a lot of know-how which can be actually developed, which can be used. So why don't we have, apart from one French company, also a Central European giant, Hungarian, Czechoslovako, whatever, which would be able actually to build nuclear power stations in Europe, elsewhere. And that could be actually a big trademark, because nuclear energy globally is actually experiencing renaissance. I mean, Rosatom is a big profiter. Chinese companies are there, South Korean companies are there. So let's have a Central European company there, and Brussels could do something useful for change and to help us create such an industrial giant. Thank you.
The concept of energy supply security consists of the two basic components. One is supply security, and the second is affordable prices for consumers. Why I'm saying that European countries can replace Russian oil and gas with another sources, but if these sources and their costs are expensive, that won't be beneficial for Europe, especially as you mentioned, for chemical industry, for car manufacturing, and for other energy-intensive industries. The European countries will lose their position and their competitions. And the second, the energy transition should be smart. It shouldn't be stupid. If the European Union wants to success and if they reach their goals on renewable energy, their strategies should be designed with the market realities from the pragmatic perspective. And the third one, especially in the power mix, power generation mix, European should be made the optimum mix. The fossil fuels, the nuclear, and renewable energy. If they want to phase out the nuclear power plant or the coal power plant in short run, it's impossible. That's why I'm calling energy transition should be smart. Also, the finance is one of the biggest problems. They have very aggressive plans. They are explaining the new strategies, very ambitious plans. But at the end of the day, these are financial investments. And the financial institutions will support these projects. If the investment costs are high, and if the income and the calculations for future prices are not clear, the finance will be a problem. But I can argue that, especially in offshore, Europe has a big chance in offshore wind power plants. But also Europe will lose its advantage against China, because China is very aggressive also in this turbine manufacturers, solar panels. That's why, as I mentioned before, European Union and European countries should be make cooperation, countries such as Turkey, for increase their competition and increase their position against the other competitor countries such as China and other Asian countries.
Thank you. So a weaker Europe must be more pragmatic in a more uncertain world.
And it needs a French James Bond.
French James Bond, that's terrible. So the questions, there were political questions. It's not a political panel, so I let them to discuss for the coffee. There were some questions about James Bond that maybe need even some more drastic drink than coffee. And there are two more important questions to sum it up. Both of them are, it's not about James Bond, but it's about Star Trek, because what are the new horizons? Questions about what other energy markets can be feasible for Europe, Mediterranean, Azeri, Africa, shale gas in Canada. What do you think will this geographical landscape of energy market change? That was one about the new horizons. The other about technologies, energy efficiency due to AI, new technologies in solar, and so on and so on. So what can we hope on new geographical energy sources, and how to trust on the new technologies in energy?
Very complex question.
It was,
A very
it was
long
from
one.
the audience, it's not me. I
Very
hope I
long
was
one,
simple
but
enough.
I think you mentioned most of the new horizons. If you talk about traditional energy sources, so that's also on our radar. So the Middle East, African region, the Caspian region, all these Turkey, all the Turkish nations and countries, which I think these could be natural business partners for Europe, for Central Eastern Europe, and for us. Of course, a little bit different that Western and Southern Mediterranean countries they do. So for them, North Africa is more obvious than to us. For us, the Caspian region is more obvious, or the Black Sea region is more obvious to go there and find routes. But I think we are still, what we are doing is just diversing the sourcing of the same feedstocks. And what, for example, we decided that we are investing a lot into the circular economy, because what we are producing is definitely a hell lot of bio and waste feedstocks. And let's try to focus on utilizing and creating value out of them. It's not replacing. It's just something that you said, that make a new horizon. Make a new horizon, which is not so, which is very pragmatic, which is feasible, which is available technologies, and going into this direction. Because in the circular economy, in the waste management, recycling or using as an energy source, we still believe that we have some room to improve and make business, but it will not be a general solution. We have to have an industry policy in Europe which are addressing the problems of all the industry segments, because this is because our company as an oil and gas and chemical company, we are facing also with the chemical business. Now all the chemical plants in Europe, usually they go on a stop and go mode. So they are hardly producing chemical feedstock because there is no demand for that, because the car manufacturing is also slow down. So, and this is a negative cycle which now affects both, and the construction is also going on a negative cycle. So all in all, we are going into an economy decline in the heavy industry. Demand and production is declining, margins are low. So there are a lot of things that we have to intervene immediately. And the new horizon, and we have to fix and keep the existing ones, develop them, and the new horizons, I think yes, all kind of technology-driven, all kind of hydrogen, all the circular economy is a very good idea, and we have to invest into them because that's we have chances to be globally competitive. I don't say that we will win, but we at least have a chance.
Well, speaking about new resources, I think it's always a welcome news because every diversification is good. So diversification is fine, dependence is not. So the more we diversify, the less dependent we become on single source. And it's always dangerous to be dependent on single source. So of course, I mean, the Caspian, we already take significant parts of our energy. We cover significant part of our energy needs from the Caspian region via Turkey. So if these things can be improved, well, that's fine. Speaking about technologies, again, you know, of course, it's a natural capitalistic process of technological innovation. That's okay, but what happened in the past decade or past 2 decades was the fact that the technologies which were not ready for the industrial use became the basis of the green transition. So I would like to warn against it. So when we talk about new technologies, let's be sure that the technologies we talk about are the technologies which are not just in laboratories, but the technologies which are ready for the industrial use. Thank you.
The New Horizons, I was working salt and gas project 3 years in Sokar, Turkey. I very experienced for this project. In the best scenario, we can bring maybe 10 to 15 billion cubic meters of gas in a best scenario from Azerbaijan and Southern Gas Corridor because they need, also Turkey signed agreement with Azerbaijan last year for capacity extension in TANAP and for the development of the new gas fields in Caspian Sea. But we need minimum 3 years for bringing additional gas. For Turkmenistan gas, it's very difficult. Yes, there are so many negotiations, but the statute problem of the Caspian Sea, of the Iran's position, brings difficulties for Turkmenistan gas. Iraqi gas is also impossible, very difficult. For East Mediterranean gas, especially Israel or Egypt, before the peaceful solution, the problems on the region, it's difficult, very difficult to bring in Israeli gas. There is only 2 options in realistic scenario, the Caspian and maybe from Algeria. But as I mentioned, we need minimum 3 years. That's why European countries will be focused more and more for LNG. But LNG will be expensive option for Europe. According to my views, the green investment will be the best option for Europe, but we can reach the absolute results on the long run. In the short and mid-term, the create an absolute alternatives to Russian gas will be very difficult. Also, the efficiency will be one of the newest source for Europe. But more efficiency will not bring the significant amount of gas for supply security. That's why maybe with the higher gas prices, the many European chemical or industrial companies will shut down their industrial facilities in Europe, and maybe they will choose to make investment in other countries such as Algeria or other energy resource-based economies, maybe in Qatar. That's why. Also, I want to give one example. European Union wants to make increase solar panel investments, but for solar cell production, for ingot and wafer, you need natural gas. For example, in Turkey we have, but our prices, our production costs are not competitive. Why? Because we are importing 99% of our gas. Yes, we discovered 700 billions of gas in Black Sea, and we started the first gas production. But our gas production will be reach 15 billion cubic meters at the end of 2026, and 2030 we will produce 30 BCM, approximately half of our gas demand. Why I'm saying that? Also, Turkey needs gas. All countries in the region need cheap gas and reliable gas sources, but create an absolute alternative in the short and mid-term is very difficult, unfortunately. That's why I'm not so optimistic for short and mid-term.
There's an old joke of how do we know that God was an Irishman? because he put just enough oil in geopolitically stable areas to get us addicted, and he put the rest of it in geopolitically unstable areas. And that is true of gas, and it's true of rare earth metals. It's true of all the things we're going to need for developing energy policy in Europe as we go forward in the 21st century. And we're going to be competing to acquire those resources with other countries. So we can talk about the technology, we can talk about how we organize internal markets or whatever, until Europe is capable of an effective foreign policy, that is capable of effective strategic thinking in promoting its interests and being able to identify and align those interests with other countries, there is no prospect of us having effective energy policy. And when we talk about new technologies, we've got to remember new technologies create new dependencies, because technologies are not things that exist in cyberspace. They're firmly embedded in physical reality and physical devices. So new technologies are not going to solve the problem. We're not going to get a Europe that has complete autonomy in energy, because we will still need other resources that either we don't have in Europe or we're not willing to process in Europe. And that means we will remain dependent on other countries. We'll remain competing for resources of other countries. And if we can't do foreign policy in Europe, and at the moment we can't, then we're going to lose the competition.
Thank you. So we have the first part of the script when serious people sitting in a room and being very pessimistic how to solve the problem. And now later we have to work out the further part of the film, how to reach the happy end. Thank you very much.